Hey, what's up everybody? Code morning to you. My name is Riley, and today we're going to be going over this right here. So if you look in the simulator, you can see we have a show pop-up button that if you click, it animates in this little blur effect as well as a pop-up right here. And if you click the done button, it does the exact opposite and gets rid of it. And this is something I've used multiple times in my career, so I thought it might be a little helpful to go over that for you guys in case you want to use it on your own careers. And over here we just have our one asset, which is just the background image. You can use anything you want, obviously, but some people like to just follow along with the video, so I'll include that for you if you so desire. Now I'm just going to throw up a table of contents. If you may already know some of this, if you do, feel free to skip ahead to the parts that interest you or something you'll actually learn. So I'll let you do that right now if you want. Otherwise, let's just jump into it. So let's open up Xcode, and I've already created a project. It's just a single view application, call it whatever you want. I just kind of cleaned up some of the files right here. I didn't change anything else. So the first thing I think we should do is going over to the assets folder. Let's just drag in the one asset we have. Just drag it, very simple. So now we have this image right here to use within our code. And let's go over to the main.storyboard, and let's actually begin setting this up. So to get that background, it's very simple. We're just going to drag in an image view. So right here, let's just drag that in. Let's set some quick constraints. If you don't know constraints already, I highly recommend you learn. I'm not going to be going over that, but just know that setting 0 on everything is going to take the entire length and width of the screen. I'm actually going to go over and I'm going to erase one because I forgot to do something. If you click this drop down, let's do view and set 0 right here. And this is actually going to extend the image above the status bar. Which if you look in the simulator right now, that's what it's like. It just looks better. So make sure you do that. And let's click on the image view. Let's go to the attributes inspector, click on the image, and let's do cabin in the woods. And let's just change the content mode from scale to fill to aspect fill so that it's not distorted and ugly. So now we have our background. That's looking pretty great. Next, let's do this button right here, the show pop-up button. So if you go back into your library, just type button, drag that in, just right about there. Now that's looking good. I'm going to call this, show pop-up. Okay. And let's set some constraints here too. We're going to do 130 on the bottom. Let's actually set the height here, or the width, I mean. Let's do a width of 100, a height of 35. Let's click enter. And if you hold control and drag to the background, you can actually set center horizontally in comparison to the background. So now this will show up horizontal all the time. And to make the button look a little bit better, let's change the text color from blue to white. And let's change the background color to that blue. Okay, so now we have our button here, and that's looking a lot better. Not pretty, but better. Okay, the next thing we're going to add is this pop-up right here. And this is just a very simple UI view. So let's do UI view. And let's drag this in. And you're going to drag it in between the first responder and the exit, not actually on the view controller itself. And if you look in our sidebar when you do that, it doesn't actually add it to the view controller at all. It's almost like its own separate entity. But when we get into the code later, I will show you a way to add this. But in the meantime, it's very beneficial to have it up here because you can actually modify the view without it taking up the entire space of your view controller, which would be very annoying for something you don't want there. So let's actually start setting this up, and we're going to drag in a label for the top title. So we just drag in the label, let go. Let's call this super pretty pop-up. I'm not very original when it comes to the text in my videos, so I apologize. Let's do 30 from the top. Let's do 15 from the left and the right. Sorry if I'm going a little fast. I just don't want to waste time on constraints. And then let's center the text here. And then we'll just make it a medium font weight. So that's looking a little bit nicer. And then let's go back into our library. Let's drag in one more label for the text below. That's this text right here. And let's do, this is a super awesome and beautiful pop-up that you are learning about now. Okay, it's extended over the edge a little bit. That's all right. So let's do 30 on the top constraint. Let's do 15 on both sides. And we're going to leave it like that for now. Let's change the lines to be 0. And what this does, it actually wraps the text around. And then let's set the alignment to be centered. Okay, so now we have that. That's looking great. Let's go into the library one more time. And we're going to create a button. And this is going to be the done button at the bottom. So drag that in, set some constraints once again. Let's do 0 on all sides except the top. And we're going to set a height of 40. So now that's there. Change the text color to be white. Change the background color to be blue. And change this text to be done. And now you actually have a super pretty pop-up. Just kidding, it's still pretty ugly. But that's what we're going to be rolling with for now. So here we go. Alright, so now we have basically everything you see set up here except for the blur view. So let's go back into the library and let's type in blur. And you can see there's two things that you have here. We're going to do the one without vibrancy. So just drag this in. And we're going to do it the same way we did before, in between first responder and exit. Just release it there. And once again, this is not attached to the view controller. We will have to add this manually later on. So this is actually all the setup we have to do for the blur view. That's pretty good right there. And let's run it just to see what it looks like. Okay, so you can see our background here. Here's our button, doesn't do anything. And you can see that none of these two items appear on the screen because they aren't attached yet. And that's exactly what it's supposed to be. So now we're going to create some outlets and some actions for these buttons. Some pretty basic stuff. So hold Option on the keyboard, click on ViewController.Swift, and it will open ViewController.Swift in our assistant editor. And I'm going to clean it up just a tad. Okay. Now let's start with adding the actions for our buttons. So let's start down here for the show pop-up. Click on it, hold Control and drag, and let's do show action. So whenever this button's pressed, it's going to call this action. Make sure you specify action. Okay, let's do the same thing for the done button up here. So you can see, even though this isn't actually attached to the view controller in the same way that all these other elements are, you can still modify them using outlets and actions. So let's do done action. Okay. Now the only outlets we have to specify are for this view and the blur view. And that's because we're going to be modifying these, animating these, so on and so forth. So Control drag. Let's call this blur view. Make sure it's an outlet. And then for the view, we're just going to call it pop-up view. So now we have the ability to modify both the blur view and the pop-up view, which we're going to do right now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the size of both the blur view and the pop-up view. So if you remember, the blur view took up the entire space of this right here. So everything was blurred out in the background. And then the pop-up view was just a little sliver of the space. And that's what we're going to set. So let's do blur view dot bounds equals self dot view dot bounds. And what this does right here is it sets the size of the blur view to be equal to size of overall view. So you're just basically copying whatever size the view is, which is the entire thing, and setting that to be the size of the blur view. And we're going to do something similar, but not quite the same. Let me open up just one page. We're going to do something very similar for the pop-up view. So we're going to do pop-up view dot bounds, except we're going to set this equal to be cgrect, open parentheses, and we're going to do this one right here. Set the x to be 0, y to be 0. So the x is going to be how far to the right this is displaced, and the y is going to be how far down this view is displaced from the top leftmost element. We're going to set the center of these to make sure they're centered within the view in a little bit, so it doesn't matter what you choose here. But I'm going to set it to 0. So now we're going to set the width of this pop-up view. And how we're going to do this is we can just copy and paste this. And then we're going to do self.view.bounds.width. So this right here would set the width to be equal to the views, which is to say the phone's width. However, we don't want it to be quite that large, so we're going to do times 0.9. And what this is it's going to set width equal to 90% of the screen. So this is not going to take up 100%, it's going to take up 90% of the screen's width. And then same thing over here, let's just copy and paste it for speed. Change width to height. And instead of taking up 90%, because that'd be a little bit too much, let's just take up 40% of the screen's height. So 40% of the screen height. And let's make this a little bit more consistent. Okay. So the width is set to 90% of the screen, the height is equal to the 40% of the screen. So that's looking pretty good right there. So the next thing we're going to do is actually animate these views in. And we're going to do this in a way that minimizes the amount of copied code. So we're going to define a new function, so func, and we're going to call it animate in, just like that. This function is going to animate in a specified view, and the specified view is actually going to be an argument. So I'm going to set an argument called desired view. It's going to be of type UI view. And what we're going to do is we're going to call this function twice. Once for the blur view and once for the pop-up view. And it's going to animate in both of these. And when you pass them in, they're going to be set as the desired view. So the desired view will be blur view or pop-up view. Okay, so let's continue on. So the first thing we want to do is I'm going to create a variable called background view. And this is just going to be self.view. So you could just type out self.view, but just for simplicity's sake, I'll make that background view. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach our desired view to the, and I'm just going to call it screen for right now. It's really going to be the self.view slash background view. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do background view dot add subview, and it's going to be desired view. So what this code does right here is it's adding either the blur view or the pop-up view to be a member of our view controller right here. So now this will actually show up on the screen. And to get rid of this little question mark right here, we're going to place an exclamation mark over here. Self.view is potentially nil, but we know it exists, so we're going to put an exclamation mark so that we don't have to deal with optionals. So now we have the view actually added to the screen. Let's start with the animation process. So the first thing we're going to do is let's do desired view dot transform. Let's do equals CG affine transform, open parentheses, scale X, Y, and follow along with me real quick and I'll explain it in a little bit. Okay. So what this code does right here is it sets the view's scaling to be 120%. So we're making the desired view, which remember is blur view or pop-up view, to be 120% of its regular size, which is this 1.2 right here. And the reason why is because we're going to make it larger, and then when we animate it, we're going to make it smaller so that it looks like it's zooming into the screen. And the next thing we're going to do is desired view dot alpha equals 0, and this makes it completely transparent. So when we animate it in, we're going to set it from 0% transparency to 100%, and we're going to make it from 120% of its regular size to just 100%. So let's do that now. So to animate it, it's actually not very complicated. We're going to do UIView.animate, and we're going to choose the first one with duration and the animations. So the duration is just going to be in seconds. So we want maybe 0.3 seconds. And then the animations is where you actually define what you want to happen. So if you press backspace, open curly brace, and return, you can do this right here. And this is what we want the end state to be. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it in here. And what values we want is we want it to be 1.0 or 100%, and we want the alpha to be 1. So what we're doing here is this is what it starts at, and after 0.3 seconds, this is what it'll end at. So as you can see, Swift handles all the hard work for us. We just tell it what we want it to be, and it will animate it from here to here. So let's actually animate the effect. It's not a very good comment, but I think you understand what I mean. So now this is all we have to do for our animation. And let's just call this within our show action. So let's do animate in. And first, let's do the blur view. And then animate in. And then the pop-up view. The reason we do the blur view first is because if you did it afterwards, it would add the blur view on top of the pop-up view, and the pop-up view would be blurred. So if we save this and we run it, we should have a pretty good looking animation. So if we click show pop-up, we can see that's pretty good right there. Pretty good is stretching it. We forgot to do one thing, and that is desired view dot center equals background view dot center. I said I was going to do this, but I totally forgot. So now if we do this, we just set the center of our desired view to be the same as the center of the background view, and it should be a little bit better now. Yep, there we go. So that's looking pretty solid right there. So really the last thing we have to do is just animate it out, which is really just reversing what we just did. So let's create a new function. Let's do func animate out, and it's going to be the same kind of architecture we had before. So let's do the desired view of type UI view, and this function is going to animate out a specified view, and we're going to jump right into the animation. So let's do UI view dot animate, and with duration let's do the same thing, 0.3. Click backspace, open curly braces, and we're going to set what we want it to end at, which is just this right here. So we can just copy this and paste it in here. So it will go from this state where it looks normal to be a little bit larger and completely transparent over the course of 0.3 seconds. But there's one last thing we need to do, and that is to cancel this out. When we added the desired view to the view controller, we have to now remove it from the view controller. Now fortunately this is pretty easy, but just follow along with me real quick. So in between the curly brace and the parentheses, just press comma, type completion, do a colon, and then open curly brace, return. And this right here, this function is going to call this animation, and whenever this animation is completed, it's going to run whatever code I put right here. And this error we're getting right here, whenever this is done running, it's going to return a value of whether or not it succeeded in the animation. We don't care so much about that, so we're just going to do _in, and that will get rid of the error. So once again, this code is going to be run whenever the animation's done. So all we need to do now is remove the desired view from the background. And all we have to do is desired view dot remove from super view. And it will just check whatever view the desired view is attached to. It's just going to remove it from there. And that is all we have to do. So now let's just call this function and we should be good to go. So animate out, and I'm going to do pop-up view first and then the blur view. It doesn't make much of a difference, but I think there may be some kind of subtle difference that makes this better. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. Let's just run it and see what we got. Okay, show pop-up. That looks good. Press done. And you can see it does the little zoom out effect and it removes it and everything looks pretty good. And we can click it again, click done, click it again, click done. And there you go, guys. That's all it took to create a pop-up in Swift. I hope you learned something from this video. If you did, leave a thumbs up. If you didn't, leave a thumbs down. Just go down in the comments and tell me how I can improve for my next video. Also, if you have any ideas on future videos, just please let me know and I'll try to create some of those for you because I don't have a million ideas, unfortunately. So, there you go, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.